Hi, this is Chuck Wolfe, and you're listening to the subject that I think you'll find very interesting. I call it leadership myths. Myths, they're not real necessarily, and they're sort of real, but your experience of it might tell a different story. And I really want to encourage people to call in. The idea behind this show was to create a call-in show where people could get help around circumstances or situations that they were facing that were challenging. So as you listen to what I have to say tonight, I hope you consider the possibility of calling in. You can see the number posted above my head in the screen that you're looking at, and so I'm not going to give it right now, but you can see the phone number, and the phone number is designed to allow you to speak with me. If you call in, you'll call in the number, and then it'll ask you for a PIN. You type in the PIN and then a pound sign, and you'll be connected with me, and I can talk with you about what's going on for you. Now, sometimes I know I've called into shows myself, and a lot of times people get very nervous before they call into a show. I guess for good reason. You're afraid of saying something silly, or maybe I'll be critical, or I'll make fun of you or tease you. And I want you to be sure that I won't do that. My concept for the show is to be helpful to people, to make a meaningful, positive difference in your life if I can. And so maybe you've got something going on in your life which has something to do with you at home, with a relationship perhaps in your family, or it has something to do in the neighborhood or a community or a group that you belong to or a team you're part of. Or maybe it's something in the workplace where you have a coworker that is difficult to deal with, or you have somebody else who has co-responsibility for a decision you need to make, and you're really seeing things very differently, and you wonder how to approach that. Or maybe you want to give some feedback to somebody you work for. And I know it's hard to imagine calling into a show like this and getting some help. But I've been doing this a long time. I'm considered an expert in the field of emotional intelligence. I've been working with emotional intelligence since the 1990s with the pioneers in emotional intelligence. And to a degree, I'm considered one of the pioneers at this point, too. Because I've created this tool, this template, that helps people to deal more effectively with emotions, whether these emotions are inside of you or they're emotions that you're worried about with somebody else, your emotional relationships with other people. And so I really hope that if you've got something where you're thinking that maybe you could get some help here with something going on in your life, that you'll give me a call. And maybe it's not even about calling in about something going on in your life, but you're just having fun listening to the stories I tell about leadership myths, and you've got a story you'd like to share yourself. And you don't have to give me your real name. I just need something to call you by. You know, you can give me whatever name you want, and I'll call you by that. So if you've ever wanted a different name, this is your chance to be called by that name if you like. Okay, so again, I'm Chuck Wolfe. The show's the Emotion Roadmap. It's called Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. We all have amazing powers to control our feelings that most of us aren't in touch with. And the goal for me when I began working with emotional intelligence, with the pioneers way back in the late 1990s, was to find a way to make the science of emotional intelligence useful to people in ways that made life better for them. And that's what I've been doing. I've had a radio show on an award-winning radio station on WPKN. In fact, you can listen to me at 6 o'clock on WPKN.org if you like, when this show's over. That's a pre-recorded show, but you can listen also. I do once a month on PKN, but for a long time I was on a lot more than that. And it was when I could travel down to the station and I could do the show live. And because they have an audience already built in, there were lots of people listening. At this point, with Simsbury Media's help, I'm getting people from different places on the internet to possibly listen to this show. And also, we might find a radio station, a local radio station. I'll say more about that if it's real, but that's going to have listeners be able to tune in and listen to me live also. So again, if you have something going on for you, and you want to call in, I'm on from 5 p.m. to 5:45 p.m., 45 minutes a day, on Tuesdays. I can't make it every Tuesday, but most Tuesdays you'll find me here at 5 o'clock for 45 minutes. And if you've got something you'd like some help with, it's so much better to call early in the show than to wait to the end when I won't have time to help you. So if you got something you'd like to talk to me about, please, pick up the phone, push the fear aside, make a decision. I'm going to I'm going to tell a story, or I'm going to get some help. This is an opportunity. I don't want to miss it. And I've had people call in, so it's happened, but we don't have a lot of listeners at this point. We have some regulars, and it's growing each week. It's growing, but again, if you'd like to call in, it makes the show more engaging and hopefully more helpful to you personally. And as I help you, I explain how this emotion roadmap works, and so that everybody out there that's listening gets to understand how a series of questions that I've created can help you to deal more effectively with your emotions internally, the emotions inside of each of you, as well as the emotional relationships you have with others. So that's what I'm trying to create here. And if you don't believe you can influence other people's emotions, well, you might be right, because I'm trying to influence yours right now so that you'll pick that phone up and make a call if you're watching. Okay. So I encourage you to call if you got something going on in your families, in your workplaces, in your communities, in the groups you belong to, the teams you might be part of, and you would like some help with something you're really uncertain about, where you have some decisions to make and they're not easy, and you're struggling with what's the right choice to make. When I help people, I tell them, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about what's going on, just a little summary of what's the challenge you're facing, what's the situation where you're uncertain about how to proceed, and then I'll ask you, how are you feeling about that situation? And how would you like to feel? Often the feelings we have if we're stuck are not the feelings that are going to be helpful. They're always important to understand. Whatever we feel is important to understand. But it may not be helpful at this particular moment in time. And if that's the case, I ask you a second question, which is, if what you're feeling isn't helpful, my second question is, what do you think would be ideal to feel? And I tie ideal to feel, not to just everybody feels happy, but by asking you and understanding what you're facing in terms of the challenge, I help you pick the right feeling for approaching that circumstance, that situation, that challenge. And there are right feelings for particular situations. And it's not obvious to people what those right feelings might be. And I've been doing this a long time. I'm really good at helping people figure that out. So it starts with, what are you feeling? And then it goes to, what would be ideal to feel if what you're feeling isn't helpful? And once we figure out what you want to feel, and sometimes this is just you, again, it may be just internal that you're struggling, but it also could be with somebody else. So if whoever else is key, I'll ask you, what is he or she, are they feeling? And what would be ideal for them? So we do the questions for you, we do the questions for anybody else that might be part of whatever it is you're trying to get done. And then we look at, okay, so how do I get from where I am, what I am feeling, to where I want to go to? And that's the idea of an emotion roadmap. How do you get from one emotion to another, one place to another place emotionally? And then we determine what strategy is really going to work. And then what I believe you have at that point is an emotion-based plan. Now, I don't think you probably ever heard the term emotion-based plan. It's a plan for your emotions. Most people, I believe, including myself up until the 1990s, really believe whatever we're feeling, that's what we're stuck with. That's what we got to feel, that we just got to work through it. Push ahead. Get stuff done no matter what we're feeling. But when I learned how powerful it could be to either change what I'm feeling to something better, or at least change the narrative around what I'm feeling so that I can deal more effectively with what's going on, the feeling's not in my way, it's not an obstacle. If I can learn to do certain things to actually make those kinds of situations, I can be more effective in those types of circumstances. That's what I want to help you with. So again, if you want to call in, you can see the numbers in front of you. I'll give them you one time now. Pick up your phone if you're going to call. The number's 402-225-0781. Give it to you one more time. Again, you don't have to use your real name, so you're welcome to say whatever you wanted to be called in life. Excuse me, 402-225-0781. And once you dial that, Then they ask you for a PIN. You should hear a request for a PIN. And I assume somebody's there now, so the PIN is 882-041-574 and the number sign. So hopefully somebody's going to pick that up and make that call. And I really look forward to talking with you if we get that chance. So the conversation today, though, because I know that, again, we don't have a lot of people tuning in necessarily at this time, although it's growing. And we're hoping to build a larger audience, and we're finding ways to do that. But one of the things that I want to do with you is talk to you about some things I think will be really useful for you if you ever find yourself in a role as a leader. Because we talk about things as if they're real. And a leadership myth to me is something that gets said a lot, but I don't find it to be real. So let me start with this one. Have you ever heard the idea about be authentic? It's really important that people are authentic, that people tell people what they're feeling, what their beliefs are, what's going on for them. Now, I've heard this time and time again. It enlightens circles of people that I think are very smart, highly educated, people with degrees from really good colleges and universities. And really smart people say, you really got to be authentic. And I'll just smile and let the room of people talk about that for a bit. And then I'll say, you know what I believe? I believe if everybody was really authentic all the time about whatever they thought and whatever they felt and whatever they believed, I don't think any organization would stay together. I mean, don't we all have moments where what might be authentic is not really a good idea to share? Let me give you a story around that. I had this experience. I won't name the organizations. It was a long time ago, but this did happen to me. This was real. I was in an organization that I had transitioned in from. I'd worked for a large oil and gas company, one of the biggest and best in the world. And I got called in to be in charge of leadership development for another organization. And it was an organization that was owned by ITT Corporation. Now, you might not know ITT Corporation, and it's a smaller company today, but at one time was one of the world's largest companies. But it was sort of a funny kind of company. It was called a holding company. And it had parts of the organization, I won't tell you the one that I was in, but it had Wonder Bread, it had Sheraton Hotels, it had the night goggles, a division that was in the defense industry that produced night goggles, and all kinds of other companies that were part of it. So anyway, one day I was there only a short time. They hired me because they thought, this particular company thought that the oil and gas company was wonderful at leadership development. And they were. They were fantastic. I really enjoyed working with them, and I learned a tremendous amount. And this group, this particular company, wanted to be better than they were. And they felt that their industry was really, it didn't have a very high satisfaction rate with the level of education and leader development that they'd been doing. And so they were looking to really heighten their capabilities. And they looked to the oil business. And they looked at IBM and some others who were really good at leadership development and had reputations for being excellent. GE was another one at the time that was really good. And they said, let's go get somebody from one of those companies. So I got recruited. And there's a long story about why I went with them, but I did. I went with them, and I got to be the director of leadership development, large organization. And I was kind of naive. I had not really worked for many industries at that point in my life, and I thought industries were similar. And I thought what I had learned at Exxon was typical. It wasn't at all. This industry really had some some very poor practices when it came to education and leadership development. In any case, I was in the room with a bunch of other people in the human resource business from this company that were there to hear from the senior vice president of human resources from ITT. So this is, if you understand it, it's almost like the parent has children. The children are the organizations that report into it. And the person in charge came into this group of probably maybe 150, 200 people who were from all over the parts of the, again, this was a very large organization that was owned by ITT. And this person came in to talk about salaries. and how they defined what was a reasonable salary for each level of position that the company identified. So you'd have things like human resource manager, you'd have general manager of a field office, you'd have underwriter, you'd have senior underwriter. All these positions are defined in terms of salary ranges. And the salary ranges are based on a competitive knowledge of what everybody else in your business and competitors might be doing and paying their people. Because at least for Exxon had this mentality that, well, this is who I work for, the oil and gas company. They had the mentality that we pay the best for every position that we hold. Nobody in our industry is going to pay more for the same position. We don't want anyone that we think is excellent to leave for more money. You won't find more money anyplace else. And so when you got picked by Exxon, you got hired by them, you thought, this is a great place to be, right? They're going to pay me as much as anybody could pay me for the same job anywhere else I might go. And more than most. So I got to this company and I thought, well, Exxon does it by understanding yearly to look at all their competitors and then look at the top pay scales on every competitor that they've got, all over the world, really. And then they say, we want to be at the top of the range for all these different positions. So they pay the most to be the best. But this company came in and said, well, we're going to ask for the best people to come work for us. And we're going to do our salary reviews across the board and look at all the competition and what's going on. And we're going to pay in the middle. We're going to try and be smart about how we recruit people and get the best people, but paying in the middle. But by the middle, by the way, we don't include one of the people that compete with us because they just pay people way too much money. And I thought to myself, well, if anybody's any good, why wouldn't they just go work for that other company that did what Exxon did, which just paid the top price for somebody that's really good in those positions? And so I was authentic. I raised my hand and I said, gee, I just came from, and I said Exxon, and I said, they looked at the salary ranges across the board. They didn't leave anybody out, never mind the one who paid the most. And they got the best people. Their talent was amazing. They got the best people, and everybody knew that you didn't leave Exxon to make more money anyplace. You couldn't do that for the same position. Maybe for a promotion, or if you wanted to live someplace else, you might leave, but not for more money for the same position. I said, so how do you do that? I was actually curious. Well, the person got kind of flustered when I asked the question, as you might imagine. And he kind of said something that made no sense, and I didn't pursue it. I just let it go. I thought, well, maybe I just don't understand. Hadn't been there that long and just didn't get it. So 15 minutes after that meeting ended, the person I worked for, my new boss, I'd only been there a few months, called me and he said, hey, Chuck, if you ever ask a question like that again, you don't get to stay. That was my experience of being authentic. The person was very upset that anybody would ask that kind of question, which is a very real question. I didn't do it to shame him. I was curious. I didn't understand. I was very naive. So being authentic isn't all it's cracked up to be, is my point. However, having said that, I do want to say that it's really important that you understand that truth is important to share in a very thoughtful way. You don't want to hide the truth. You don't want to lie. You don't want to cover it up. Something that needs to be said, but you have to find a way to do it that I consider to be emotionally intelligent. You have to think about, how is this other person going to feel when I say this to him? Now, if I had thought of that before I asked my question, I might have not ever asked that question in front of that large group. I might have gone back to my manager and just said, gee, I was surprised that this senior VP from IT said things like, how does that actually work? But never would I have done that, knowing what I know now, in a large group meeting, which was extremely embarrassing. And I'm lucky I didn't get fired. But they invested too much in me at that point. They didn't want to lose me, so they hoped that that would be the one kind of ridiculous thing that I would do in the time I was there. And I didn't do many more. I didn't make too many mistakes like that. But that was again, I was being authentic. I wasn't being belligerent. I wasn't being angry. I just curious. So, but being truthful, I think, at the same time is really important. So that's why I say being authentic is kind of a myth in the sense that you don't just say what's on your mind. You don't just speak up without thinking about the consequences. You always want to be real and truthful, but only when you can do it in a way that is constructive. It isn't enough to just say something if you want to see a change happen. You really want to be thoughtful about how can I say this in a way that it's thought about and considered and ultimately leads to the change that I think needs to happen, as opposed to where we're going or how we're doing things right now. If I want to be authentic and say, I don't think this is going to work the way you're talking about it, or I think this is dumb, which you might think something's dumb, but do you really want to say that in that way? No, you don't. No, you don't. In fact, one of the things I learned over time, and this is just another useful thing to think about as somebody who participates in organizational life, is that when you are considering that something in your group, when you have a group meeting and people are talking about different ways to get things done, and somebody says something that is completely, in your mind, insane even, or just like makes no sense to you, and you ask yourself, and this is what I've learned to ask myself, now, what am I missing? As opposed to how I heard what was just said, what am I missing? Because this is not an insane person. This is not a dumb person. This is somebody I actually know to be smart. And what they just said doesn't sound smart. So maybe it's something I'm missing. Maybe I missed there was a connection being made to something that I don't remember or I didn't hear or at least didn't understand in the way that this person was reacting and why that person thought that whatever it was he or she said was worth sharing. So again, being authentic might be, why would you say that? It seems so dumb to me. Never. I mean, again, if I'm not getting it, then I ask myself, I wonder if it's more useful for me to consider what might that mean? How could that be useful? What did I miss? Because that's a person that makes sense most of the time. This doesn't make sense, so perhaps it's something I don't understand. And it's not about him or her. It's more about me and trying to understand why that was just said. So that's the myth about being authentic that I wanted to share with you. It's important to be truthful, but in the right way at the right time, with the right people, in a way that's constructive, that helps to move whatever it is forward that you're dealing with. The next myth is one of the ones that, it's employees are our most valuable asset. Now, I've heard that in almost I've worked with the military, I've worked with manufacturing, I've worked with high technology, I've worked with banks, insurance companies, oil companies, chemical companies, I've worked in schools and universities, and everywhere, everyone says, that's a leader, that people that work here are our most valuable assets. And in my experience, and maybe yours is different than mine, it's not true. It really is just a myth. Because most of the time, in most of the places, there are other things that are more important than the people that work there from the senior leader perspectives. One is return on investment, return on capital, return on return on equity. It's these ideas of profitability drives our ability to stay in business. It allows us to continue to thrive. If we're not profitable, then it doesn't matter what we think about our employees. Now, in the case of a few instances, I have had the pleasure to work with certain leaders who own that, who believe that fiercely, and would fight for the people that worked with them. And in those organizations, you felt it. I posted this, what I was going to talk about today, and LinkedIn, and it was it's the idea of trying to get people to understand the importance of the people that work for you, because people, they may not remember what you did or what you said, but they remember how you make them feel. Don't you remember how people have made you feel? And in feeling proud, in feeling appreciated, respected, valued, inspired, motivated, engaged. When you feel like that, that's when the organization is demonstrating that they really care about you. Now, I have to say, I think there are more organizations that are trying to make that happen these days. I really do. I really think there's been movement towards trying to be more thoughtful about how employees feel and the way we deal with employees. But you know, for the longest time in management theory, there was the notion going back way to probably the 60s or 70s, at least the first time I heard about it, was that we want people not to be dictatorial as leaders. We want people who are empowering others, who recognize how critical delegation of key skills allow people below them to develop into more highly talented either individual contributors or into more effective leaders. So they talked about consultative or participative management, where you asked people what they thought, or you sort of laid out a directive and said, you go do that. I trust you enough to do that. And this concept, this movement started, again, probably 60s, 70s, early 80s. There was a lot of talk about that. But then you'd see who got promoted in the organization. And it wasn't these people that empowered others. It wasn't these people that were participative. It was the demand success, demand goal achievement, the people that were putting fear into people's hearts and lives and causing people to work around the clock to make sure that their division, their operation, their team was more highly successful than others. Now, that works for a time until you burn people out. Or people who are really talented think, I don't have to take this. And they move on. There's a lot less of a commitment. And this goes back again, for those of you that are younger, you don't know this, but years ago there used to be what was called the psychological or social contract, where you went to work for an organization and you stayed for a very long time. Again, for people who are my age, baby boomers, there was what they call the Depression generation. Our parents grew up at a time when the Depression had sunk in, and you were so happy to go to work. You didn't care what people told you to do. You would just do it. You would enjoy being told what to do. And there's still people that like that. There's still people that really like knowing specifically what a person who they report to is asking for. One of the things a good leader does is to understand that the person in front of me isn't the same as the person sitting beside them on either side. And if I'm going to deal with this person, I need to understand what's motivational to him or her. Different than perhaps I could be motivated or these other people would be motivated. How do I motivate and engage each person? How do I value them in a way that they feel is appropriate for what they think is important? So I think that's part of it. But I think the people that generate fear and competition and really push hard and demand success and get promoted send a signal in the organization that, hey, I know we keep saying employees are our most valuable asset, but look who we promote. Pay attention to what we do, not what we say. And pay attention to how it makes you feel. So I think, again, that's another myth. It isn't a myth in every company, and I'm happy to say that. And I think that if you're lucky enough to work for a leader that cares about you, that supports you, that goes to bat for you, there's somebody that helps to promote you, that doesn't really worry about if you get promoted that you won't work for him or her anymore, but that you'll be able to rise, and that person still, no matter what happens, is in your corner. They get you to that next level and isn't worried about losing you. Aren't you lucky if you work for somebody like that? And by the way, if you are a leader, you could become that person for others. You could be that person. You could demonstrate a real caring, a real initiative, a real love of the other person, in the sense that you love the fact that they're willing to work as hard as they can for you, and you'll support them in any way you can, and that's partly why they do what they do for you. So I think that's a really important consideration. The other myth, I think, that's out there, another myth that's out there, is this idea of needing a safe space, right? there's a lot of talk about safe spaces these days. Now, what's curious to me is that it seems like the concept of a safe space is really important psychologically for certain reasons that I consider to be the right reasons and dangerous in other ways. Let me try to explain what I mean. A safe space isn't a place where you go because somebody gave you some critical feedback and you're upset by it. A safe space indicates to me what's real about a safe space in terms of why it's out there and why it's productive to create this idea of a safe space is that if you work for me and you see something where I'm doing something or about to make a decision or about to enact something that you feel is critically wrong, that will be harmful to me, maybe to your team, maybe to your whole department or organization, and you are nervous and afraid to say it to me because you're fearful that I'll be jumping all over you, metaphorically, and making you feel bad because that's happening, then I think you're going to feel like, I can't say this. I want to say this, but I can't. I don't trust that it's going to be okay if I say this. And I don't even know if I'm certain. I think I'm certain I'm right, but I don't know 100%. But 90% of me feels like if we make this move, we're cutting our own throats and symbolically. So safe space, in the right sense, means tell me anything that you think is important for me to know. Don't hold it back. On the other hand, a safe space where you can go and talk to a counselor because somebody said something that you found disconcerting. They were critical of the way you did something or said something or wrote something, and you have to go to see a counselor because of that. I think that is problematic. I think conflict, just another thought about safe spaces, I think conflict is what drives innovation. If we understand how to manage conflict and we encourage people to share their different views of how to go about getting something done or what they think the next new product should be or how we go about generating a solution to a problem we've been facing for a long time. If we have different opinions and we really listen hard to each other and try to learn from each other, not just shout over each other, often innovation shows up. But if we bury conflict because I don't want you to be mad at me, I don't want anybody to be mad, I want harmony everywhere, if we go about that, I think that's the wrong kind of safe space. The right kind of safe space is where we feel like we can speak up and will be heard and listened to and valued, even when people disagree with us. So that's another one of the things I think about that people really want to get a handle on. So I've been talking about different things that are what I consider to be leadership myths. Do you have any? Do you have any experience with any of these same things that I've talked to you about? A time when you were authentic, didn't quite work out the way you wanted, or a safe space that really wasn't a safe space, or what you think about safe spaces. So again, if you've got something on your mind that you'd like to share, I still have enough time that I can talk with you about it if you like. The number to call is 402-225-0781. 0781. And then there's a PIN that they'll ask you for, and the PIN is 882-041-574 in the pound sign. (402-225-0781) and then the PIN 882-041-574 in the pound sign. Now, what might you call about? You might call about your workplace. You might call about any of these myths I've been talking about, what you think about that. You might want to call about something to do with your home life, something in your community, something with family, friends, neighbors. There's all kinds of challenges we face in life that have emotional attachments that are pretty powerful and strong, and we sometimes worry a lot about those emotions in play, and we don't want to do the wrong thing. And so give me a call and see if I can help you do the right thing. See if I can help you do the right thing. And again, you don't have to use your real name. Use any name you want. Use the name that maybe you wish you were born with, or just one that you'd like to be called, whatever works for you. Okay, well, I'll talk about the last myth then, and that's about work-life balance. Now, I know there are people out there that are doing a good job with this. I think there are people out there that figured out how to actually spend enough time at work to get ahead. People with careers in mind, the people that want to be promoted, people that want to make a really nice living and live very comfortably. And then there's people that are, just doing the best they can. They have a job. They're not really thinking they're going to get advancement or promotions, but they're making money, just enough to live on. And they're trying to do what they can for their family at the same time. And it's struggles. They're struggling, but they're working at it. And I remember working years ago in a school where I was talking to people about trying to spend time with your children when you're raising a family, and work is really important, and you find yourself doing the 40-hour minimum, but often going much, much longer than that. And so how do you spend time then with your children? And I think the thing to say to you is, and I've said this before, and I think it's really true to a degree, is that whatever time you have, make sure it's quality time, that you're really in the room with them when you're actually sitting with them, or that you're doing an activity where you go out together and you let go of whatever's in your head that might be hanging on that relates to some other things that are not about being with your family member. This isn't just about children. This is with partners who aren't finding the time that they thought they'd have to be together, or making time for aging parents who took care of you and raised you, and they're very needy at the end of their lives often, and trying to find time for all of it is really challenging for most people. So I think the compromise you make with yourself is to make sure that you're allocating time to all the important people in your life, so you don't look back at the end of your life and say, I should have spent more time with so-and-so. There's the old saying that somebody on their deathbed, when you're about to pass away, they don't say, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. And yet that's where a lot of us spend a lot of time, is at offices or at workplaces. So try to be balanced on this. Again, another story I'll tell you. This was a friend of mine that I got to know and I liked a lot, and he was really brilliant. And he went to work for a consulting company that's well known. Again, I won't share their name, but they're a consulting company that was known for making tons of money. The people that went to work for them that became consultants, especially the partners, they made lots and lots of money, and they were brilliant, and they got to go to great places and spend time, months in certain places with clients that they just lived it and worked and they loved it. These were brilliant, really brilliant people that had to be brilliant to be able to succeed in that world, but also be willing to sacrifice your time in these places. So one day, this friend of mine told me a story, and he was now on his own. And I said, geez, what happened? I know you were working, and I won't mention the company, and I know a lot of people wanted to work for that company, at the schools I went to, and people were thrilled, and I was happy for you got to work there. He said, Chuck, they talk about work-life balance, but my grandfather passed away, and the funeral was going to be the following week, and I said, I've got to take the week off. I've got to go see my grandfather. And they said, you have a client presentation that week. This is a big client. This is a big deal. And he told me, he said, I know that, and I wouldn't go except this is my grandfather. It was very important to me, and I really want to be there for my grandmother and for my parents. And we've got it covered. I've schooled the person that will take my place, but they like you. They really want you to be there. And he said, I understand that, but I'm telling you that I'm going to my grandfather's funeral. And they said, you can't. We won't let you. And he said, that what did you say? You said you won't let me? He said, no, we won't let you. I'm sorry, but you don't get to decide whether I go to my grandfather's funeral. I no longer work for you. And so you have my resignation. You'll have a letter from me by the end of the day. But that's totally unacceptable. Thank you for the opportunity to work here. And I wish you well. And I will see you later. And he quit, just like that. But that company, that's the reputation they had. You didn't get to go to people's funerals. You did the work, and you paid the price so that at some point, if luck held and your performance was, it was really hit the mark, you'd get to be senior partner, and you'd create financial independence for yourself. But that wasn't what life was about for him. He loved the work. He loved the challenge. He loved the people. They were all extremely bright. And he loved the customers and all the work that he did. He decided to do it on his own. And he became very wealthy at the end of that. He really did. He did very well with that. So, it's one of those things where know who you're joining if you're joining the company. Understand what it's like to work there before you make that decision about where you're going to join. If you really want a work-life balance, look for the companies where it isn't just talked about, but people get to live and enjoy their families at the same time. They get the chance to be the best versions of themselves at work. So those are the myths that I want to break down for you. Work-life balance exists in certain places, but certainly not everywhere. Being authentic is something that you can do in certain places at certain times in a certain way when you're being really thoughtful about how people are going to feel about what you're about to say. It's really important to share the truth, but to share the truth in ways that allow people to hear the truth and to benefit from what you have to say. And don't get upset with you for having said that. But sometimes, even if you do it the right way, people might be upset. But they're typically not so upset with you if you've been thoughtful about this. They're just upset that they have to deal with what you brought up to the table. But shame on you if you don't bring it up. Safe spaces, well, there's two kinds of safe. The one kind of safe that I think is really healthy, that's the idea that you want to be able to say what you need to say. Be heard in a way that you want to be heard, so that people understand that you are a participant and you're going to be fully engaged and you're going to give everything your best shot, and that sometimes means saying something that others don't want to hear, but knowing it's the right thing to do and being willing to do that and knowing you're going to be safe. That's the right safe space. Running to have to see somebody to hold your hand because somebody said something critical, no, you've got to be tougher than that. You've got to have some sense of thick skin, but also understand that criticism, in my mind at least, is the breakfast of champions. It's how you grow. If nobody ever told you what you were doing wrong, you would never know you were doing it wrong. And you would do it wrong over and over and over again. There's a way to give feedback, though, and let me close with that, I guess. The way to give feedback is, first of all, understand who it is you're talking to, and understand that maybe that they don't handle feedback that well. And so you might ask them, look, I got some feedback. It has some criticism in it. So is there a good way to tell you that? Is there a good way to share that with you? What's the best way to do that with you? And is it okay to share? I always feel like it's important to ask permission. If they say, you know what, I had some bad news today. I really can't handle that today. Let's set up a time for tomorrow or the next day. And I'm happy to hear it, but I just can't hear it right now. Because wouldn't you rather know that than say it at a time when somebody was just really struggling with something personal that they just heard about what happened to them, and they they go off the handle because it wasn't a good time for them and you didn't know that, and so you did what you thought was right, but it didn't work out right. So I encourage you, always ask for permission. And on the receiving end of it, treat it as a gift. It's not easy for people to give you feedback. If somebody's willing to tell you where you might have messed up and what you could do to make it better, I would say treat it as a gift and be very thankful. And then, if you got to take out some aggression, go for a longer walk, go for a run, listen to some music, whatever it is that helps you deal with the anger, a resentment that might bubble up as a result of hearing it. And then allow yourself to be more calm and be thoughtful about how you deal with it. And treat it as something that might be useful and help you grow. Well, that's my show. This is Chuck Wolfe. You've been listening to the